We wanted to begin with a few ideas about conflict. And the first is that conflict is inevitable. It's all around you. Difference leads to conflict. You can't get away from it. So when we talk of conflict resolution, resolution doesn't always happen. It's more like management. We manage the conflict. So we find the inevitability of conflict to be all around us.
Although we also are claiming, we often ask our students in the class we co-teach together at UALR to make claims, whether speaking or writing. We're claiming that with dialogue, conflict can lead to connection and even creativity and innovation.
So we're going to start off with something very similar to what happened to us when we first started teaching together 27, 28 years ago. We came together to try to plan our class, and Michael says this to me.
So Carol, I've heard very good things about you, but I know you'll agree with me as we design this class. I know you're from applied communication, I'm from rhetoric and writing, that surely you'll agree that the emphasis should be on writing, not speaking, because after all, everyone knows how to speak, right?
Okay.
I'm being a jerk.
There's a moment here. I've got a choice to make. This is a significant choice. What's at stake with the choice I make and how I respond to this person? Any ideas? Any choice? What's at stake here? Collaboration is at stake. Future relationship is at stake. So I've got to be very careful when I respond, because I could very easily say something like, well, Michael, you were Johnny-come-latelys really to the communication thing. I mean, Aristotle wrote about speaking. Cicero wrote about speaking. And when they put together the idea of logos, pathos, and ethos, they were talking about speaking, not writing. So let's get it straight here.
I'm out of here.
Okay, so that way, obviously, that is what we call a bifurcation point. It's a point at which we could lead the communication off. It could veer off in a negative way, or it could veer off in a positive way. This is what we actually said. Well, Michael, I can understand how you would think that, because we do learn to speak before we learn to write. I mean, that makes sense. But would you agree with me that sometimes talking just gets to talking at somebody and we're not really communicating? Can we get that far?
Yes, we could. So I'm going to stand up. We're kind of going in and out of our dialogue and moving up to this meta level where we're commenting on what's going on. So here's what I think's happening. Maybe you could help me figure this out. I think I'm trying to lean in toward Carol, make eye contact. I believe what I'm doing, I could be wrong, is trying what we often call Rogerian feedback or active listening, where I give back to Carol what she said. So I hear you saying that speaking is more than just speaking, it's about communication. Yeah. So I'm giving her that back and waiting to see what her response will be. Does that make sense? I think that's part of this. I'm going to sit down again. We're boomers, so we get seats.
So could it be, Michael, I really like what you said about beginning to see that, you know, there's something good that goes on in this communication idea, because it could take place, I hope you agree, in speaking and in writing.
I do agree with that.
Okay. So could it be that we could somehow speak in order to write?
How neat. In fact, when I teach writing, I often have students work in conference groups and they have to speak, but sometimes their groups are a little dysfunctional because they don't know how to communicate. Okay. So I really like that.
Okay. Well, what I do sometimes in class is I have people write down what they're thinking about an idea, just to get their head in the right direction. So we start off with kind of a free write, you know, kind of just a minute or two, get your idea down. So in that instance, would it be we speak in order to write, but then we write in order to speak?
We've got it, Carol. I mean, we produced something new. It actually became our mantra: speak to write and write to speak.
Right.
After our initial dialogue.
Okay.
So yeah, we did it.
Yeah, we did it.
Cool.
So we wanted to pull out, some of these points that have to do with conflict. And there are many ways to approach conflict, and we didn't put them all on the screen because there are many, many more ways than this. But one is we could have avoided the issue altogether, and so what would that have looked like if I had avoided working with Michael? What would it have looked like? Yeah, let's just talk about that later.
Right.
All right, I'm avoiding it. Fighting to win, which is really what I was doing the first time, because I was calling him names essentially, wasn't I? I was calling him names, Johnny come lately, to the communication thing, which is also known as competition. Accommodation is what? Yeah, giving in. I'm just a pushover. Hey, yeah, let's just do it about writing. Yeah, forget about the speaking part. We'll just do it about writing. And then finally, the last one, and this is where we want to go with this, dialogue. And we should say authentic dialogue. Dialogue that is authentic, dialogue that is real, because we have a lot of dialogue that's going on. Dialogue all the time with varying viewpoints, but it's not authentic, it's not real. So there's some characteristics here. And Michael, would you like to take us through some of the characteristics?
I will. If you'll join me.
I will,
if your
absolutely.
voice will follow my voice.
You know it will.
Clearly what we're getting at is that dialogue involves turn taking and sort of an even distribution of the turns in the conversation. I thought maybe the audience could humor me a little bit. Years and years ago, there was a rhetorician named Protagoras, and he said there were two approaches to conflict or disagreement. And he said one was the closed-fisted approach. So if we all make a closed fist with me. That's one approach. And the other approach, he said, was open hands. And that's a dialogical approach. Does that make sense in a kind of, spiritual level almost? So, Joe?
Also, coming down to the next two, I imagine, the idea of cooperation, not competition, and the idea of dynamic flexibility and being open to change. I see these two things as blending, melding together, because our culture is fighting against these all the time. We live in a culture, what is valued, listening or speaking? Speaking. We value speaking, not listening, and yet listening, someone was talking about earlier, I think it was Tuzev, talking about sales and things like that and being able to enter into sales. I bought a car from someone in St. Louis one time a few years ago. I didn't know it at the time when I walked in, I just happened to get him as a salesman, but he was a master salesman. As I'm sitting there, I'm seeing all of his awards all over the wall, and I think, oh my goodness, I'm really in for it. So I go in, and I just sit, and he listens to me. He talks. I talk. He listens. And I finally say, well, I see you have all of these awards, and I'm waiting to be sold. He says, what I do is I listen. I listen to find out what you need, to find out what you want. I pay attention to you. And it was true, because we had a lengthy conversation about it. So we've got to kind of change this dynamic around from the idea that we have to talk all the time to let's listen. That we have to be in conflict all the time. And I don't know about you, but I almost cannot stand watching television or watching news. It's constantly this agonistic conflict going back and forth, and I just want someone to sit down and just tell us about it in some way. So we've got cooperation, not competition. And then if you feel good about who you are as a human being, I think earlier in the last presentation, and that was really good because Michael's presentation just kind of led the way to some of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation. But this idea of dynamic flexibility and being open to change. open to change. In other words, this idea of humility. I don't have all the ideas. Does anyone in here have all the ideas? Is anyone in here always right? Raise your hand. Oh, yes, hands are going up all over the room. I said, right. Right, but that's what authentic dialogue is. You enter that authentic dialogue with this idea that I'm willing to be changed by you. I am willing for that to happen through this dialogue. And that is what's so wonderful about dialogue, is that you actually create something new when it's working right. Michael?
I was just going to say, being mindful of Michael's earlier presentation, he already did our presentation in a sense, but we had a great conversation with Michael last night. And he was talking about improv, and all of a sudden Carol and I had these spark experience. We said, okay, what's dialogue? It's improv. It can't be scripted, right? There's no way to script a dialogue. It has to be spontaneous. It has to be done in relationship to the utterances of the other completely. And I think what Carol's talking about, and that I value too, is this complete change in the way we are as human beings, in a sense. I mean, I think if you know people that I call conversational monopolizers, these are the people that just want to talk. You don't get a word in at all. That's not what this is about, really, when you say, Carol. I don't think teaching's about that, quite frankly.
Right.
Or lecturing.
Yeah. Right. Any kind of good communication is an improv, really, because you don't know where it's going. Because you are willing to learn from that person. You know you don't know everything. And so together, you kind of work together, to make it happen.
So we learned from Michael last night. That's what we're trying to say, through listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I should say very quickly that this presentation itself was shaped in part by our dialogue with Tusif and Brooke. I mean, even the title comes from Tusif. We didn't come up with this originally, but it was that dialogue.
If you were thinking that title is pretty clever, it wasn't us. It was Tusif. It was not us.
Right.
So, we have a slide here that I found this when I was putting the PowerPoint together. This idea of I need to talk to a human. I need to talk to a human. How many of you have felt that? I need to talk to a human. Certainly when you're upset, certainly when you're angry, certainly when you've got a complaint, you need to talk to a human and not that recording that comes on. But I think this is important too in interpersonal context as well. You saw the wonderful role play we had earlier of the millennial and the boomer.
Yeah.
Our complaints are that it's not just millennials, it's Xers, it's Y people, it's boomers. Everybody seems to be on their phone. That one commercial that you might have seen where two people are sitting in a booth and they're texting each other and they're breaking up. That relationship is breaking up and nobody says anything. They don't look at each other. They don't talk to each other. I need to talk to a human, a real human. And so that's what leads and prompts Michael and I to be so excited about what we're trying to talk to you about today. This idea, let's bring human beings back into this communicative equation. Let's make it happen. And so the look of dialogue, it has a look. We can tell when it's truly going on. You can look across the table at a restaurant and see who is really entering into dialogue and who isn't. You can just tell. You can see it. It involves things like open hands. Michael just did that wonderful thing, having us open the hands. It involves really looking at the person in the person's eyes. It has to do with really close personal distance. Like, could Michael and I have a really good, authentic conversation from this distance?
Come back to the chair, Carol.
Right. Or could we have a good personal conversation, say, with someone in the back of the room? No, it's got to be here at a minimum. Close personal distance. You get close to other human beings. You look at other human beings. You nod, like Michael. Michael is so good at doing that. I love talking to him because he nods and makes me feel like I'm so smart and I'm so intelligent and all of
He
these
is.
things. Oh, how wonderful is that? So being totally involved with positive facial expressions. Have you ever talked to somebody who has a flat affect, whose face does not show emotion or feeling, and you can't read them? Our former chancellor was that way at one time at the university. And I would talk to him, and it would be, I couldn't read him. I couldn't figure out who this person is because he never let his feelings or emotions show. So that has to be there. And I think these two go hand in hand. Authentic dialogue is electric. You are lighting holy sparks with someone when you're entering into those real dialogues. And think about times when you've had those meaningful conversations. They're probably still embedded in your brain. I can remember times I've had these very close conversations where we solved the problems of the world. Not really, but at the time you felt it happened. That's what good, authentic dialogue is. It's electric. And Michael, we talked about a positive outcome for all parties. Would you like to explore that a bit?
Yes, I'd like to, again, comment on something Michael said in an earlier presentation. Remember he talked about different departments and the crossover between those departments? Carol and I are from different disciplines. And I actually believe this. I learn more when I'm stretched across a disciplinary line. If I talk to a chemist, rather than people in my own department, that's when the sparks start to fly. But that happens through dialogue as well. I was going to say something else. I've noticed that two of the best students I've ever taught are here. Amanda, I was so privileged to teach in a language theory class, she's brilliant. And also Marina, who is a student of both Carol and mine, is here. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, but we also found that dialogue in the classroom can include students. So we actually became learners as we interacted with people like Marina, who's really smart. So I think that's a positive outcome.
Right. Exactly. And if you're in a team at work, a group of people, you are a team, you're working to solve a problem. One of the core things about dialogue, I think that we found emerged from our class, is that we work every single day to get every single person involved in that conversation. We figure out sneaky ways to get everybody to talk. Now, there are quiet people, and I'm a quiet person, you won't believe that right now, but I'm a quiet person, and in a group, I tend not to talk. And so I really love it when someone says, oh, Carol, you were saying something about that just the other day. To bring the quiet people into the conversation. Finding ways to include all voices, that's when it becomes powerful. But conflict, which leads to connection, leads to greater impact. So if we have conflict and we approach it dialogically, in other words, I really want to solve this. I don't agree with you. I want to solve this. I want to be able to create something new, and I am willing to give up some of my power, some of my control, so that we can begin to create something new. Have you ever had that experience where two people working together come up with something that's just more powerful than you could ever have dreamed of by yourself?
Tusif mentioned that we should have a digital renaissance. And what does that mean? And we started talking about how the Renaissance happened. And it happened through dialogue across divisions. So you had artists talking to poets, talking to people that weren't like themselves. And I honestly believe more and more the older I get, that that's where creativity is. It's when we can cross that line and then sparks start to fly. At least that's my own personal belief at this point.
Michael did that wonderful role play with millennials and baby boomers. Before we even saw that, we wrote this. Dialogue is key to engaging with different generations. And you could see that happen in the role play. Could you not? As you begin to see something from somebody else's point of view. And that's where this wonderful thing called empathy comes into play.
That Michael mentioned.
Yeah, Michael mentioned empathy. It's a strong, powerful thing. I was just reading an article about people who are in high-stress jobs. And it turns out, like doctors or people who, air traffic controllers or various kinds of people, they're in high-stress jobs. But if they're able to find a way to empathize with people, it eases the stress, and they do better work through their ability to empathize with other people. I think that is so strong and so powerful. And so what we're talking about here is what Martin Buber said, who's a great philosopher and theorician, said, in a dialogue, you treat people as the very one that you are. So I'm in dialogue with you, and you are the very one that I am, and we are working together to create this wonderful, powerful, positive thing. So we've got a process model for you to follow, and there's a handout for you in the sheet.
We would like to invite you to engage in dialogue with a neighbor.
You want to recognize a difference, and then both of you present your different viewpoints. Allow the dialogue to unfold with active listening. And notice those, remember we talked about significant choice when we began? Bifurcation points, those points where you can take the conversation in a positive direction or a negative direction. Notice that, and then reflect and search for common ground, much as Michael and I tried to do at the very beginning. And then that could lead to creative development of solutions and synthesis. So on your handout, Michael, would you kind of lead us through that?
TUSIP came up with these. This is, again, the result of dialogue and collaboration. But could you talk with each other until you find a difference regarding your musical preferences or food preferences or your favorite car? And just find a point of difference and then take it from there through dialogue and just see what happens. This is an experiment. We hope it goes well. So you need to talk. We need to shut up. You need to talk.
And we will ask you to report when you're done.
Yes. This is out of control. This is great. We love it. Being out of control is a good thing in dialogue. Before we exit, what were your experiences? Any ideas or thoughts?
She likes hip-hop mainly because she likes hearing words. And I actually don't listen to words when I listen to music. I listen more to melody.
Yeah, okay. Okay, how did it work? Did you notice any bifurcation point where you had to, am I going to make a better relationship?
She's pretty open to communication, so it's pretty easy to find a common ground, I would say.
Okay.
But no, I didn't find any place where when we were discussing together, we couldn't resolve our own issue.
Okay, all right.
So are you saying, I'm trying to be an active listener, I hear you saying that in your dialogue, you might have come to better understand your own position. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. It made me a bit more open to that music, that I was not necessarily keen on getting into it.
Yes.
And she opened my eyes to how you could listen to it differently. Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Great conclusion. We're out of time. Thank you so much.
One last word. The time for authentic dialogue is now. We're going to lose our human connection if we don't really work on it daily to connect with people around us. So thank you.
Thank you all.